When you expand the lens, the family starts to make sense. So we're each responsible for the lives that we touch, for lives that we save, or for lives where we contribute to people's death.
I've shared before about my relationship with my father, and it was challenging at times. He was relatively narcissistic and had a really big heart, and was really loving, but really stuck in his own stuff. And for years, like, I wanted to change him, I wanted to fix him, I wanted something to be different, and it really hurt the relationship. And with my kids, I want something to be different, I want to change something, I want it to look different. So it really challenges and hurts those relationships too. And when I start coming to some of these modalities, and NVC in particular, and family constellations and neuroscience also, I'm specifically talking about those relationships transform. And the magical transformation with my relationship with my father was more than words can describe. And the last 2 years was so rich because, again, I got out of the way. If he was complaining about something, I'd just reflect back, oh, yeah, that sounds really challenging. Well, yeah, it sounds like you're having a really, really hard day. And as soon as he got acknowledged and someone actually shared his reality, then we actually got to have some real connecting conversations. And it's the exact same way that it's going to work with my kids and my grandkids, and other young people, my nieces and nephews, and anyone else in my life. So I need to really come from this place of, how do I foster connection? And I foster connection through communication. I foster connection through understanding the neuroscience. And Sarah spoke about the amygdala in the first part of the show, where we're reacting to something in the past and the present because the amygdala has no sense of time. So just learning these different things, and then you add the family constellation on, and you start to see how all the players are performing and acting out. It gives me such a tremendous amount of relief in my relationships with my daughters. And I guess with every other human being in my life, it just gives me relief to understand so much more, to be able to see so much more of the field. So I'm grateful to all these modalities, and NVC and family constellations, and learning about neuroscience. And I encourage you to, check out the show notes, get in touch with Sarah, watch some of her free meditations, Google neuroscience, family constellations, NVC, learn about this stuff. It is life changing and could potentially save or change or alter your relationship with anyone in your life that you're struggling with. And if you like what we're talking about, please subscribe, share, and support us. We could definitely use some financial support on keeping these podcasts coming to you too. There's a place to donate in the show notes. It would be great if you become a monthly donor. That would be really, really useful. And we really appreciate you coming along from the journey. So let's jump into part two. And I'm curious, you came to NVC and constellations to save your son, to give some different tools to work with it. But how has it changed all your relationships? How has it changed your life? Like, what has this
Yeah.
done to make Sarah's life something?
Yeah, this is such a sweet question. Because of everything I learned, even though I couldn't save my sweet boy, I'm able to contribute to the lives of other people. And of course, my own self. I love talking about how learning about relational neuroscience helps us make our brains good places to live. Like if you imagine walking into a house, what kind of a house do you walk into when you're entering your own brain space, Is your own brain home cozy? Is it warm? Is it welcoming? Is it colorful? Is it got the music you love playing? Does it have good smells coming from the kitchen? Or do you walk into an empty house with no furniture and dirt in the corners, and no music system and no friends? I mean, it's sort of like, it really is a beautiful metaphor for, like, how do we find ourselves inside of here? Because all the things that are considered our addictions and our compulsions, anything from alcoholism to video games, we're just trying to manage the inside of the brain. And if we begin to really learn how to do self-compassion, we make our brain just so much cozier. but people always say, they just say, be self-compassionate, be warm with yourself. There's like no technology offered, no skill building, no how-tos. And part of that one beautiful how-to is the nonviolent communication, and the beginning to see name our own feelings, which calms the amygdala, and name our own needs, which starts to awaken the hippocampus with the context of, why are we feeling what we're feeling? Why is it so important?
Mm, that is very cool, and I hear that by seeking solutions for your son and for your family, you've had the opportunity to help a tremendous amount of people. And in the beginning, it was about trying to help yourself, trying to help your son, but it's expanded the world, and the world's a better place, right?
Yeah,
And then I also like the happy brain, the happy brain. That's very sweet. And then you mentioned a word there that I think is really, really important to spend a couple seconds on, and it's technology,
yeah,
right? Like we hear like stuff, hey, this too shall pass, this is going to go away. My mom always says what comes will go. And I'm like, okay. But like we need technology, and if we take the word technology and we apply it to like learning a life skill, like just how to communicate through like nonviolent communication or whatever kind of communication you're going to pick up. My choices of modality is MVC, and we learn how to listen to people. We learn how to remove ourselves, to give them empathy, to give them compassion, to connect with them. Like this word technology, like we really got to think like, hey, we're in this really stressful situation. Like if my computer was broken, I would go to the Apple store, wherever, to get it fixed. Like why won't I do that with my communication? Why won't I?
right,
Right.
right.
So I love you bringing the word technology in here. Like we need technology in order to move forward, and we're talking about emotional, spiritual communication technology, for
Yeah,
whatever word in you. Yeah.
yeah,
So I really enjoyed that. And I just to touch back on like your personal experience and what MVC has done for you, how has it changed your relationships with like the raw relationships with your partner, with your son,
yeah.
both sons at the time, with your parents? Like what happened to those relationships for you?
Yeah. Oh, such lovely things. My mother died about 10 years ago. While she was alive, she really never enjoyed my body. She wanted a little sylph child. She wanted a slender, tiny little dancing little nymph, and I was very, I was a very strong, active, athletic little person, and she had no appreciation for my body at all. And as I grew older, she would just say to me, "You're fat. You're fat." And I would take it back to my NVC practice group, and I would go, "Oh, my mother said this to me again." And it was like 10 years of my mother doing this in my practice group, saying, "Do you need some acknowledgement of rage? Are you pissed? Are you sad? Are you lonely? Just staying with me." At about year 10, it was quite a thing. My mother said to me, "You're fat." And I said, "Mom, when you see my body, do you get really worried that nobody's going to love me?" And she said, "Yes." And she stopped saying it for a year and a half. She was in her 80s. She stopped saying it for a year and a half. She started again. I did something similar again, and she stopped again until she died. I mean, it was really quite something to have such a toxic message be transformed. It wasn't something I could effort. It just came out naturally once I'd been held so often for the pain of receiving such a message, that naturally an empathy guess flowed out of me for my mom. And so that kind of thing is really lovely. Another thing that happened was, uh, I don't know how many of your audience have read Inbal Kashtan's book on parenting, but she has this really sweet story in it about how her son was banging. Her parents came to visit, and they were sleeping downstairs, and her son was banging on the floor above they were sleeping downstairs. He was in the kitchen and above their bed, and he was banging a truck on the ground. And she said to him, "Sweetheart, and you seem to be really loving to bang the truck, but your grandparents are sleeping downstairs, and I wonder if you'd be willing to stop banging. And he said, yes, I'm willing. And she said, wow, that's really interesting. Tell me why you're willing. She said, are you worried? Do you care about grandma and grandpa? He said, no, but I care about you. and and I was like, this is just a fairy tale. This is a total fairy tale. I said when I first read the book, when my birth son was about 6 or 7, I was like, this is never going to happen. But I learned nonviolent communication. I learned it anyway, even though I figured it was a fairy tale. And then there was this very funny day that happened, like, he was 10. So 3 years later, we'd been doing nonviolent communication for 3 years. And I said to him, sweetheart, would you, to my birth son, I said, would you be willing to, we were leaving the house, would you be willing to turn off the light in the turtle cage? And he said, I don't want to, but I'm willing. And that very same day, he was playing downstairs with his friend, and I could hear their voices getting louder and louder. And I knew it had been a while since they had a snack, and I was making dinner. And my adopted son was in the living room watching basketball. And I called out to my adopted son, who was at that time would have been 20, 26, 25. And I said, hey, Ben, would you be willing to take us a snack down to the kids? I said, I'm worried. I'm hearing their voices get really, really heated, and they haven't eaten. And he said, I don't want to, but I'm willing. And I was like, oh my God, it's not a fairy tale. It's,
Wow.
we've moved from the disorganized attachment that came from my childhood, because my mom had really bad trauma when she was a baby and had dissociative identity disorder. So the parenting was very disorganized. And we moved to partnership. We moved to helping each other, being with one another in ways that were really lovely and have continued to evolve as I've learned more and more and more about language and attachment, and what the language patterns are with different attachment styles. And it's just I've just become closer and closer with my living son, and um, you know, still miss the one that we lost, but just love him so much still.
Mm, mm. Thank you for sharing about your family system. And when you were talking about your mother and her calling you fat, and like it took years and years to come up with an empathy guess, but also the beauty and magic about MBC is removing myself from the equation and giving someone empathy. They might be like, my daughter might be saying, I hate you, or you're the worst, or I hope you die, or whatever like that. And the empathy guess, very similar to like your mother's, is you're angry at me, you're upset, you don't want to see me, or whatever the thing is. And
Yeah,
it's not about me. It's
right,
about the other person
right.
being heard.
Yeah,
So that was a really magical thing with your mom, and I love the "Are you willing?" and seeing the
yeah,
evolution of the "Are you willing?"
yeah.
And I'll share for me, and I've said this before, is with my parents, with my father before he passed. Like I'd been practicing NVC for maybe 2 or 3 years, and for the last couple of years of his life, I didn't need anything from him. I would sit with him, I would give him empathy for where he was at, and then
Oh,
our conversation just kept evolving. I learned about how he was raised, his relationship to God, his fear
mm,
of death, like all these different things. And no one in the family really knew about him because he was always complaining and everyone was always trying to change, fix, or do something different versus just like with your mother,
yeah,
just give a little bit of empathy. And with my mom now too, like I don't need much. And I just give her empathy 97% of the time, and our relationship is great. And
mm,
it's really magical. So
mm,
I was having a conversation with someone else the other day, and this work with our parents and healing this generational trauma, and even some of the lineage trauma coming down that they have unresolved, right? Like I heard you do with your mother. I've had a different experience with my parents. but it feels like I need to heal that stuff and be able to, in order to be able to work with my kids and work with younger people in my lives and heal those relationships too. Like it really feels like it's this whole circle. I can't just work in one direction. Like I need to, and this is more of a question. Like I'm healing the older wounds and the more generational stuff before I can focus on healing the stuff that's emergent with the kids as they grow up. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I often have that feeling with constellation work that what we're doing is we're healing the past generations. That as we bring compassion to the older family patterns, that we're just really rewiring our brains and we're rewiring our inheritance from the older generations. Nonviolent communication, the needs based meditations that Robert Gonzalez used to teach and that his followers still teach in nonviolent communication, have been proven by Herbert Benson at the hospital attached to Harvard University, that it changes the epigenetic expression of the hypothalamus, which is where we regulate stress. So when we change something epigenetically, we're changing our transgenerational inheritance. And so yes, 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 and both for the living and for the dead, and for the living and dead that we carry within us.
And like when I'm working with my parents and I'm doing empathy, their grasp of it. I see my mother changing her language around me because sometimes I'm like, you're not listening, you're not hearing me. So she actually gives me empathy and she's not in any
Oh,
kind of framework.
oh,
But the thing that I'm noticing when I talk to my nieces and nephews and some younger people in my life, and I talk about the framework of empathy, they're able to grasp it much quicker and start to use it in a different way that I wouldn't have been capable at a younger age because I just didn't have any technology. And I'm curious, as you're transmitting the stuff to your son and sons, did they incorporate some of this unknowingly in their life and how they started communicating with people in their system?
yeah, it would happen all the time. Um, my older son would want me to do empathy for his friends who were living through hard stuff. My younger son um, would just naturally started to assume the speech patterns that create less blame in the world. So he was he was talking about his head of school, and the guy's name was Mark, and he said, today Mark did something that I did not enjoy. No judgment, no, like really self-responsible, taking full responsibility. I did not enjoy that.
That is very cool. And the reason that I ask you this question again with folks in our community that are struggling with relationships with their kids, as we work on ourselves, as we cultivate new technology like NBC, neuroscience, family constellations, any of it, and we start to transmit this in all areas of our life, our parents, our kids, our cousins, our nephews, their lives start to change. So this is a different kind of parenting. This isn't the parenting saying no, don't do that, or yes, you can go there. This is an embodied parenting. I would say would be a word that I would use.
Yeah, it goes right to the heart of what's needed in attachment, which is to be understood. In order to have secure attachment, we have to be understood and have our emotions reflected. And that's what secure attachment is, and that's what nonviolent communication gives us.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I don't have any contact with my two older kids, which I'm not really sure that you know that. But my youngest daughter, who's 22 now, I still talk to regularly, and a lot of the conversations is through empathy, and it's transformative, and we stay in connection, and we stay energetically together, and we attune. And again, the reason I'm saying this to the community again, like there's different ways to communicate with our kids and create connection that aren't traditional. These are new technologies that are life changing and life affirming, and that's why we want to introduce you to these through the podcast. So they're incredibly important and useful, and there's a lot of different modalities out there.
Yeah.
So, Sarah, you said before that you've written a couple books, which are fantastic. Can you tell the audience a little bit about your books and
Oh,
where to
sure,
look for them, stuff like
sure.
that?
So the books can be bought through any online bookseller or ordered from a brick and mortar store, which I always encourage because it's nice to support our little bookstores. The first book was called Your Resonant Self, and it has guided meditations and exercises to engage your brain's capacity for healing. And if you like the sound of that, there's a free series of guided meditations. These same meditations I read into recordings for you on the website, Peyton.com. There's a button that says Start Healing Now. You can press that button and you'll get meditations sent to your inbox to be able to listen to. And then the second book is called Your Resonant Self Workbook. And it's all about the agreements and unconscious contracts that we make with ourselves to try to survive being too alone in the world. The ways that we promise ourselves that we'll never speak publicly, for example, in order to avoid humiliation and shame, or that we won't express ourselves, or that we'll become invisible, or that we will believe that we don't matter, or will refuse to accept the possibility that we could be included. We'll just be an outsider forever. All of those stories that we tell ourselves, that's what the second book is about. And then there's a book of affirmations for turbulent times that's so wonderful. Sort of, if you're like, I don't want to do neuroscience at all, I just want to have some of this empathy for myself, then grab that one. And then I just came out with Roxy Manning, my co author of The Anti Racist Heart, for people who are like, well, this stuff's all real interesting on a personal level, but what about the systemic? And all of these books can also be found at my website, sarahpeyton.com, and classes and recordings and constellations.
Thank you for that, Sarah. And all Sarah's information is going to be in the show notes. So you can get hold of her. You can get onto the website. You can try some of that of the free meditations. And it's really cool that you did a book with Roxy. And Roxy's another superstar ninja. And just as we're getting closer to wrapping up, like you talked about systems, and I don't think we've really spent much time on that. And for a lot of people in the community, you're like, hey, my child doesn't talk to me. This sucks. I hate it. My life's over. I'm lonely. I'm isolated.
Yeah,
Whatever it is. But this is all part of a much bigger system, which is the family system, where you have the ex-partner, you have the grandparents, you have friends, you have supporting people. So can you talk a little bit about like systems and
yeah,
what that means to you within the context of families really
yeah,
struggling with some really heavy emotional situations?
right. Well, there are like societal forces that impact families and make parental alienation and the loss of connection in families even more acute. Things like poverty, things like racism, things like the prioritization of um, even by women, the prioritization of men, like that the sons are the ones that matter and the daughters don't matter. Those kinds of things that come from even outside the family. I mean, it's bad enough what happens in our family, but what's happening in our family is really a reflection of what are the collective traumas that have impacted our family and impacted everybody epigenetically to make people isolate instead of allowing them to integrate and connect and be connected with one another. So, traditional losses, excuse me, the loss of land for example, for indigenous peoples, there's tremendous loss of land, which is shown to go directly into all kinds of personal trauma, the expression of personal trauma. But this can be in our families as well. For example, all of the immigration from Europe to the United States or from other parts of the world to the United States. This kind of forced separation between generations in immigration can leave brains with a coping strategy of isolation instead of being able to reach for one another. So not only do we get to look at what's the impact of of the previous generations and their relationships on our relational patterns, but what's the impact of what history has done to our families? The Irish famine, the famines in Ukraine and Eastern Europe in the late 1800s and in Scandinavia that led to a lot of immigration. There's still impacts rolling down through the generations from these huge losses.
Thank you. Thank you for taking a large view and expanding it out with family systems and systems in general. And if we're going to just look at like the system of what a lot of parents are going through, you got the court system, you have the mental health system, you have the financial institution system, which is just sucking money out of every place that they can do. So really, like we come in here struggling as an individual, but it's really a systemic issue. And on the systemic level, is where we will see change. So I just wanted to introduce that idea with Sarah to the community, and definitely something we'll dig into deeper. And now I'm just this is a question that I don't know if you have an answer for. Do you have a story you can share about someone that's gone through your constellations that was struggling with family or connection or something like that, where there was an aha moment or some kind of maybe someone shared a year later or some kind of reconciliation or something like that? Just to throw that out there as we're wrapping up.
So I was working in Europe, and there was a woman that was working with a sense of being not being able to be connected with the family, and I said, well, when you're working physically in Europe, there's so often an impact of World War II. And I said, what was the what happened for your grandparents during World War II? And she said, oh, they really escaped any impact. There really was no impact for them. Both my grandfathers, she said, were train drivers. They were engine drivers for trains in Eastern Europe. And I said, well, here we are, with knowing what the cargo was on trains in Eastern Europe. It was people who were being taken to concentration camps. It was dead bodies. It was, this is, train drivers did not escape from, the impact of trauma. And we were able to begin to include. So part of what happens in constellation work is you expand the lens of who's part of the family. And when you expand the lens, the family starts to make sense. So we're each responsible for the lives that we touch, for lives that we save, or for lives where we contribute to people's death. So the family itself consists, in that case, of the grandparents, but it also consists of all of the people who were impacted and killed in the concentration camps, who were transported in those trains. So there's a huge um, expansion and a depth of understanding of the way that people had to stop thinking of themselves as connected to one another in order to survive. And then the granddaughter being able to come to a place of more connection with herself and more connection with others, is moving away from the old pattern of the family of just being disconnected in order to survive.
Hmm. So through her work, she found that she was disconnected, just in the survival mode, very similar to what her grandfathers was probably would do, just driving those trains, and she had to heal that. And again, such important work in contextualizing it on family systems level. Like we're doing a lot of this important work to create space to reconnect with people and our children and our parents and anyone else in the family. Again, when they get into their own work through whatever modality or lens, like they can start looking at the system and what's happening and how to change the outcome. So that's really rich and hopeful and wonderful, and sounds like an incredible experience. And we're going to be wrapping up here, Sarah. And I guess the last question that I would say for you, if parents that were struggling with alienation, with no connection with their kids or grandkids, and they wanted to do some constellation work, would you suggest they just show up at a regular constellation? Would there be somewhere specific you would suggest? Like, what are your thoughts about that?
Well, if you're interested, you can start taking classes with me online. I do all my work online right now as a result of both family situation and the after effects of the pandemic. It's really fun to work online because you don't have to travel anywhere, but it's less fun because you don't get to hug people. I'm going to have one live event opportunity. It's already sold. All the beds are already sold out. People will have to be at Airbnbs or go camping in Abiquiu, New Mexico, the Western Constellations Intensive. It's happening in the beginning of March. March? May, beginning of May. And that will be really a delight. But the other possibility is to find constellation facilitators in your own area. You can look up fancy family constellations, Akron, Ohio, and see what's there, or Columbus. And then another possibility is, to begin to read about it and to think about your own life.
Well, thank you, Sarah. Thank you for coming out. And again, we're going to share all Sarah's information in the show notes. You'll be able to get hold of her, learn about constellations, more MPC stuff. The neuroscience stuff is wicked cool. And it's so great to see you and get to share and spend some time in your energy. And thank you, thank you, thank you from me and the community.
Thank you, Lawrence. It's a pleasure to spend time with you too.
What a great show. And we really got to talk about some bigger visions near the end of the show about family systems. And Sarah went in some different directions away from the traditional family system where I say I'm struggling with my children or my grandchildren or my parents. And she extrapolated it out to World War II and some other stories that were going on there. And I think that's really important because this is really complex what we're dealing with. It's not that I just want to get my kid back, it's that I'm dealing with the court systems. I'm dealing with the court systems that were set up not to handle families, not to handle mental health. I'm dealing with professionals that are driven by money. Like so much money is getting sucked out by people just using a traumatized community to make money. There's so many different things. So Sarah's example was really great. And then we bring it back to our community. What are the different things in our community within the system that we really need to look at? And we need to do this work to kind of have a larger view to actually have an impact on what we're challenged with. And I think for me, in the beginning, it was just about impacting what was happening with my kids. And now it's a larger footprint. It's about impacting actual systemic change so people don't have to go through this, or they can have information sooner so they don't have to necessarily make the same mistakes. So I hope that makes sense. I just think it's really an important larger view and stuff for us to consider as we want to heal ourselves and heal this part of the world and this part of the system so our kids can have a much better opportunity to have a better life. So that's a lot out of me, maybe too much and too directional. I'm not really sure, but thank you for coming along. And we appreciate you. We love having you on the journey. familydisappeared@gmail.com. Send me an email, ask a question, make a suggestion. If you got something you want to contribute to the show, you want to be a guest, you want to do a little short spot, you have letters you'd like to send in for us to read, let us know what you want to do. We got a bunch of new stuff coming out in this next season. So, and maybe it's already been launched because this is getting taped a little in the front. So, in case nobody's told you yet today, I love you. And I hope you have a beautiful day. And I hope you get to say you love you to someone else too.